Hello, everybody. We are back, and this has been a very, very requested show since we last spoke to this gentleman across from me, up somewhere in the northwest where I never remember, somewhere near Preston or Liverpool or something.
It's all
Ladies
the
and
same.
it's all the same when you live down south, isn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, I called him the Great on Twitter, and he liked that. So the Great Kieran Maguire, football finance expert, author of priceoffootball.com. Kieran, lovely to speak to you. How are you?
I'm absolutely rocking and rolling, Ben. Looking forward to this. The Championship's my favourite division as always. So I think we've got lots of tales to tell of daring do in that division of craziness.
When you say that, it is because it's funny, though, isn't it?
It's just amazing. The owners hate each other. The owners are doing this, that, and the other. The fans are up in arms. The football is fantastic. It's Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, Tuesday. What a division! What a division to be connected with.
Let's talk a bit about you because everybody loves to talk about themselves, don't they? Now, since we last spoke, you've kind of become an international TV and radio personality. If you follow Kieran on Twitter, he'll at 6 a.m. he'll post he's on Radio Manchester, and you're like, oh, nice one, Kieran. And then at 8 a.m. he'll be on BBC Breakfast, and then at 10 a.m. he's on Sky. How is this all working career-wise? And is this the time now more than ever where your knowledge base and what you've studied is most in demand?
It has. I think I've done over 300 interviews this year, which is great. From an analytical, from a research point of view, it's been a good year. I actually benefited to a certain extent that I had to have my half of my knee replaced last year, so I was stuck in bed. I had nothing to do but look at football finance accounts and build up an even bigger database than before. But on a slightly more serious note, I think football has had lots of downs rather than ups over the course of the last 12 months. That sparked a lot of media interest. We've had the tragedy at what's happened to Bury Football Club, a failure of governance, a failure of the EFL really to monitor the game. We've had a very near crisis at Bolton Wanderers, and again, poor governance, allowing people in charge of clubs who you'd
Southend
raise an
yesterday,
eyebrow to.
Kieran.
Sorry?
Southend yesterday got another winding up order as
Southend
well.
went. Yeah, that's right. Southend had a winding up order. One of their directors has quit this morning. It's just a whole lot of crazy, and for whatever reasons, I've sort of been involved in the middle of it from a reporting point of view, because I've set up alerts, and every time something happens at Company's House, I get an alert and I go in and talk about it, and the media seem to like it. I mean, football's actually a very small industry, but with a very big voice, because football is far more than just a business. It's a central part to our life. It's the heart of a local community. It brings smiles to the faces of people in a town or city, like nothing else can, with the exception of Ben Stokes.
So basically, what you're saying is you're the respectable face of crazy in 2019 now, brought in every time. And we should mention as well that Kieran is a very devout Brighton fan. How long is your commute to Brighton?
On last Saturday, when we played Burnley at home,
And got
I,
done in
I
the last
set
minute.
off. Yeah, we conceded in the last minute. Yeah, that was a mean journey home. I set off I left home at 6:15, and I got home at about 11:45.
There you go.
I've got a fantastic wife. I've got an absolutely brilliant wife. She's
Behind
very,
every
very
great
tolerant of my
man
obsession.
is a great woman. But this is relevant because most of the big transfer stories in the summer were Mopai going out from Brentford to Brighton, Webster going out from Bristol City to Brighton, Clark in to Brighton and out to Derby, Moy Huddersfield's best player out, and Knockaert into Fulham. So the Brighton theme might get a little look. Let's sweep through what we did last time, which people seem to enjoy, Kieran, as we kind of grouped the teams up and we went through and you gave us a few nuggets. A lot of people laughed at my agog face as you red pilled me on some of the ridiculous things that are happening, particularly in terms of championship spending. There's basically going to be two words, and three letters that we're going to mention a hell of a lot, Kieran. The two words are parachute payments, and the three letters are FFP. We'll save the FFP stuff for Birmingham because I guess your followers and followers of the channel here kind of know what they're on about. Talk to me about parachute payments, though. Just a quick overview because we're going to mention it over and over again, aren't we? Are parachute payments the most important factor in any discussion about the championship?
Um, I think so. In certainly in terms of finance, they are. They give a club anywhere between a 7 and a 35 million pound head up, a leg start over the other competing clubs. They don't always work. If you look to see what's happened at Hull, if you look at the sides who are at the bottom of the championship at present, we've got Stoke who are down there. They weren't expecting Huddersfield. They're struggling as well. So there are good things and bad things about parachute payments. Parachute payments are there at the behest of the Premier League. It is very much a case of the Premier League wants their members to be able to go out into the transfer market in Europe and they can blitz anybody, clubs in the Premier League, because unless you are competing against Champions League club teams, you've actually got you've got more money. Huddersfield last season, they earned more money from the Premier League TV deal than Bayern Munich did from the Bundesliga TV deal. Yeah, that's just nuts. Yeah, and that allows small clubs. So, it's the likes of Bournemouth, Burnley, Brighton, my team, Crystal Palace, and so on. It allows them to go out into that transfer market and say, we can outbid everybody apart from the elite 25 in the whole of the rest of the Europe. So it allows the Premier League's quality of product to be that much more sophisticated. The downside of that is that if you are signing a player and you're offering him, the going rate for a club in the bottom 14, 45 to 50, 60 grand. If you're going to offer somebody that an amount on a 4-year contract, you've got to be able to cope when the shock happens. And it doesn't matter whether you have parachute payments or not, there's still going to be 3 teams who are going to be relegated at the end of the season. And it's to protect those 3 teams from themselves potentially going into administration that we have the parachute payments. It's an emotional subject. My view is that they're a necessary evil. Other people disagree, and you have to accept the views of each and all.
My reaction to your comment, they sometimes don't work. I was trying to think of an analogy, and I thought if you put me in a Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton in a Vauxhall Astra, Lewis Hamilton would probably still beat me in the race. So it depends who's driving the Ferrari in terms of the owners of the parachute clubs, right?
That's right, and there's also you end up with issues such as the classic Nikola Zigic scenario at Birmingham City. They signed him. He was a record signing at the time. He was on 50 or 60 grand a week at Birmingham, and he wasn't perhaps as good as the management had anticipated. The club gets relegated, and all of a sudden, if you're Nicola, you're not going to walk away from that contract because everybody else knows that you're stinking the place out. Everybody knows, hey, he's 6'7", and that's all he is. He's not actually the most sophisticated footballer. He's a fair to middling championship striker. Is anybody else going to pay him 60 grand a week? No. So therefore, you need the parachute payments because it's a legacy problem of getting relegated.
Interesting. With that being said, let's talk about our 3 year 1 parachute teams. So Kieran, I've got 42.6 million coming in for these 3 just relegated from the Premier League. We have Fulham, who were only up for 1 season. Cardiff, who were also only up for 1 season, weren't they? So they'll only receive 2 sets of parachute payments. And Huddersfield, who we've already kind of talked about. Fulham have got quite an interesting strategy here, and I'll be fascinated to hear what you think of it, as in borrowing elite level championship players rather than spending the fee. So I'm sure there'll be a pretty penny in salaries and maybe a big promotion bonus at the end for Knockaert, Cavaliero and Arta. Cardiff and Huddersfield have been quite prudent and sold, and sort of Zohore is covering a lot of Cardiff spending, and it was billing that went to Bournemouth from Huddersfield. Talk to me about those three, and particularly, is there sense? You know, when we're buying a house, everyone says don't rent, buy. Is there any sense in what Fulham have done in borrowing a really good set of wingers to add to their front three?
Yeah, I mean, to use your analogy of rent don't buy, let's say that I'm on a fantastic contract for a year. Somebody's asked me to go and teach in New York, and they've offered me a couple of £100,000. I'm going to go to New York, and I'm going to find myself a fantastic apartment. But I also know at the end of that 1 year, I'm going back to be some schmuck teaching at a uni, and I'm going to be on the public sector employees. We're not well paid. We don't moan about it. Well, we do, but yeah, we don't moan about it too much. It goes as part of the deal. So I think what the strategy of Fulham is that Shahid Khan, he thinks that their rightful place is in the Premier League, but he's also mindful is that if it doesn't work out this season, he needs to put the brakes on. So therefore, by signing those players that you mentioned on effectively 1-year loan agreements, yes, he's having to pay out a lot in wages, but if it doesn't work out, there won't be a legacy problem in 2020-21. And I think if you take a look at the Championship as a whole, a lot of clubs are being promoted on the back of their ability to source high quality loanees on season year loans. And the proportion of deals that are loans has increased significantly. So if you take a look at the Premier League and the Championship as a whole, about 5 or 6 years ago, I reckon it was around about 8% of transfers were loan deals. This year, it's 30%. So there's clearly been significant changes in the business models of both clubs in the Premier League and the Championship as well.
Yeah, you're totally
that
right.
deals with Fulham.
You're totally right, though, on the loan thing. It did my nut when people said Villa overspent when they went up. They wouldn't have gone up without Mings or Abraham, who were both loaned. So my argument to that was they've had to spend to even reach the level of team that they had last year in the Championship. What about Huddersfield and Cardiff? I think it's interesting you said about the legacy, because maybe Fulham would have spent if they knew they had 3 years parachute payments coming, but they've only got 2. Cardiff have got a very good manager in Championship terms in Warnock, and Huddersfield looks an absolute bloody mess at the moment. You would expect Cardiff to finish in the top 8, and you'd expect Huddersfield to at least be set up next year for the Cowleys. How do you see those two playing out?
Yeah, I think Neil Warnock is an interesting character, as we all know. He's an excellent man manager. He can spot a bargain. His strength isn't sort of sophisticated pep ball. You're going to get the fairly standard 4-4-2 scenario from Neil, and he will motivate his players. And as you say, I'd expect them to be top 8. They've not lost significant players in terms of who made a contribution last season. Also, you've got to look at it from the owner's point of view. I don't think that the owner expects them to be in the Premier League on a regular basis, unlike Shahid Khan. As far as Huddersfield are concerned, Dean Hoyle sold the club in the summer. We've got a new owner come in. The first thing he's trying to do is to find his feet. So what he's decided he doesn't want to do is to go out and spend a lot of money in the market recruiting players. They did let Aaron Moy go on loan, and that seems an unusual deal, that he signed a new 3-year contract, and then an hour later he turns up at the Amex. What on earth's going on there? So I think he wants to see if he can break into to the Albion team and establish himself once more as a Premier League club. But going back to the issues we were mentioning earlier in terms of the quality of loan players, if you think about Huddersfield themselves, why were they promoted, or what was a major contributory factor to them getting promoted? Aaron Moy on loan, Izzy Brown on loan. And Izzy Brown that season, he was magnificent. And then he came to us at Brighton the following season, and things just he started off poorly, didn't get any better. Then he did his ACL. He had a terrible season for us, and since then I think he's struggled to get his confidence back in his ability. So getting a good loan signings is critical. You look at Derby last season and Villa. Those are the sides that were involved in the playoffs, and both of them had excellent loan signings, as well as some unusual transactions involving their stadium, to which we might discuss a little bit later.
We'll get onto that as well. Sheffield United, when they got to January as well, the gamble was, right, we're going to take Medine on loan, we're going to take Hogan on loan, and we're going to take Dowell on loan. And you can imagine what the deals looked like. It was, right, you come in for 4 months, we'll pay you a decent whack, but here's £500,000 if we get promoted, or something of that effect, wouldn't it? So, yeah, you're totally right. Our year 2 parachute teams, Kieran, we've got Swansea, Stoke, and West Brom. West Brom removed Darren Moore, to the press's surprise, but not to many people's surprise who actually watched the division last season. They've backed Slaven Bilic, but they did raise 30 million from sales. When you have a Chinese buyer, Kieran, the income tends to be quite good, doesn't it? Swansea, very thrifty, but they've started brilliantly. And Stoke, just hopeless, where they backed Rowett to buy a load of players, and now they've backed Jones to buy a load of players, and now they're bottom of the table with a load of players. So the way I'm looking at these year 2 teams, Kieran, you've got Swansea who are cautious, West Brom who are moderate, and Stoke who are completely reckless. Am I on the right track with those 3?
I think that's a fair assessment, and again, you've got to look beyond what you're seeing on the pitch to what's happening on the boardroom. As far as Swansea are concerned, they've got American owners who don't want to put a dime into the club. I think they've appointed Trevor Birch, who is, he's an accountant first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and then he's a football person sixth. Trevor Birch has been involved with a lot of clubs, some successful, some not, but he knows his way around, controlling costs, and that is his brief. Fantastic for them in that they lost Graham Potter. So that looked like it was going to be a step backwards. They lost Dan James, they lost McBurney. Most clubs you would have thought those are quite shocks, but they've done superbly, and you've got to wish them all the best on the back of that. It does go to show in the Championship that having a good dressing room, having a good working environment is more important. Trying to work out West Brom's a bit tricky. They have got Chinese owners, but they've not put a huge amount of money into the club. But I think what they have done is that they've allowed the manager to compete reasonably well. And I think if you take a look at the Championship transfer market overall this summer, it was fairly subdued in terms of purchases. We weren't having the Assombalonga £15 million deals going left, right, and centre there, and that we were seeing a year or two ago. Some of the owners who had gambled on their parachute payments, and what I've been seeing in both terms of parachute payments and FFP, it's trying to spend 3 years worth of money in 2 years, and then when you get to year 3, let's put the brakes on. Let's put those brakes on fast. So that's going to perhaps bite at West Brom next season. But Stoke are bankrolled by Bet365. So therefore, they can lose as much money as they want. Their only fear is going to be FFP. If you take a look at
Kieran, sorry, can you just give a quick reminder about at what point you get punished for FFP, just so everyone knows where we are? We'll do more detail on Birmingham, but just give us the figures real quick.
Right. The way that FFP works is that you are allowed to lose an FFP loss of £39 million over 3 seasons. But if you've been in the Premier League during that 3-year period, instead of getting £13 million a season, you get a £35 million allowance. So as far as Stoke City are concerned, this season, because this will be their 2nd season in the Championship and they'll have 1 season in the Premier League, it will be 35 plus 13 plus 13, so they'll be allowed an FFP loss of 61 million. Now FFP is there's a lot of small print. There's 106 pages of the nonsense, and because I don't have a life, I'm a chartered accountant, I don't have any friends.
You've read it twice.
I know each of those 100 pages. I know all of those pages really well. And there's lots of ways that you can spend money which doesn't count towards your losses. So if you spend money on your academy, if you spend money on infrastructure, if you spend money on community projects, if you spend money on women's football, all of these things are great. All these things are to be encouraged, and they don't count towards your FFP loss. So instead of £39 million, you could easily have a loss of 55, £60 million in the accounts. And people are going, well, hey, shouldn't this club be subject to FFP sanctions? The answer there would be no by the time you strip those out. But our baseline figure, £39 million over 3 years.
That's really interesting. So are you saying that Stoke off the pitch isn't a huge worry, but next international break they may be firing their manager, and they can probably afford to do that again this season if they need to?
Yeah, they can afford to do whatever they want, because that's cash. That's the owners saying, we're just going to stick more money into the club, because if they're bankrolled by Bet365. I don't know whether you've seen. I have seen Bet365 account, because that's the type of nonsense that I do. Bet365 last year took around £60 billion in bets. Now, to give you that some sort of context, the biggest club in the Premier League takes 600 million. It takes 1/100th of what Bet365 are taking home. So football is, as I say, it's a small industry which supports a huge related businesses, of which clearly gambling is one.
Interesting. Kieran, that's all the parachute team's done. And by a weird quirk, because it's been as high as 10 before, we've only got 6 this season. What is your view? Does less parachute teams reduce the distortion, or does it give those 6 teams the money they've got even more impact? How do you think that plays?
I think it does give greater opportunities for the other clubs, the more established clubs in that division, because you know that at least one club is going to struggle. They'll have got their sums wrong. You've only got to think about what happened to Sunderland when the year they went down. They had players on big contracts who weren't prepared to leave, and that caused toxic relationship in the dressing room. The club therefore falls down the floor. We've seen that, I think, to an extent with Stoke this season, also with Huddersfield. So therefore, it does give huge opportunities for the remaining clubs to push a little bit harder to get promoted this season, but also the quality of the coaching, the quality of the recruitment, and the quality of the academy are coming to the fore, which I think is what we've seen in the case of both Leeds and Swansea.
Interesting. Right, you love Derby, Kieran, so they're going to get their own little segment here. Derby are the team that have consistently not had parachute money, yet tried to compete on an even footing with parachute money. And for the first time today, we're going to talk about stadium, which we call it repositioning and leasing. And we've got to talk about Wayne Rooney and 32 Red as well, Kieran. If you can, summarise where Mr. Mel Morris is with Derby. Are they still going towards an iceberg? And how do you see it playing out? Because the team doesn't look that competitive this season.
Well, first of all, and if there's any lawyers listening, Mel Morris has not broken any rules. So let's get across that. Derby have consistently spent money on wages. If you take a look at the last 3 seasons, in 2016, for every £100 through the door, they spent 157. The following year, 137. Last year, 161. So they are living beyond their means in terms of what you call standard business. That's before you put petrol in the mower to cut the grass. That's before you put your floodlights on. That's before you pay for the hotels of the squad when they go on away matches. Before any of that, they're already losing money, and they're losing a lot of money. So what Derby have done, they have sold some players in the past. If you think about the likes of Will Hughes and so on, that those players have generated Tom Ince. Those players have generated some fairly decent profits in 2017. They didn't do so well in 2018 in that regards, and they've probably not done so well in 2019.
Well, all their best players were loanees last year, Kieran. So how could they sell them?
Well, exactly. So therefore, if they can't sell the players to make up this shortfall, they've got to go and sell something else. And they're looking around and saying, "Well, what can we sell? Hold it, we're in Pride Park. Let's go and sell. Let's go and sell Pride Park to somebody." And they go, "Well, who would want to buy a football stadium for a club that is losing, on a regular business basis? It's losing around about £900,000 a week. So there's not a big pool of people." And they're looking around the boardroom, and then they all go, "Mel, you're rich. Why don't you go and buy it yourself?" So Mel Morris says, "Yeah, okay, that's what I'm going to do." And
Mel Morris, who already owns the stadium, yes? Or rather owns the club that plays in the stadium, yes?
That's right. So Mel Morris owns Derby County Football Club. He also owns the company called Sevco 5112, which owns Derby County Football Club. It also owns Derby County Academy Limited. It owns Derby County Commercial Limited. There's lots of little companies that are being created. And then a couple of months ago, he set up another company called Gelor 5 something. Trying to follow this, it's a bit like doing a Rubik's cube. It's a real challenge, but it's good fun. Until 2016, the EFL financial fair play rules specifically said, if you sell a fixed asset, i.e., a long-term asset such as a football stadium, if you sell it, that's fine. That from a cash point of view, you're perfectly legal. Nothing wrong with that from a legality point of view. When it comes to FFP, the profit on that sale, we're going to ignore. And the reason why they said this was, if you go to the UEFA FFP rules, which, hey, funnily enough, I've read, it says we don't want these profits to be included because it doesn't create a sustainable club. It's short-termism, and we want clubs to exist in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years' time. And that was all fine. And then in 2016, nobody knows why this is. My understanding, and I'm not, I've been known to be occasionally critical of Sean Harvey. In 2016, the rules were changed, and all of a sudden, that particular rule was removed from the statute. So nobody really noticed it at the time, apart from dullards such as me, who go through small print and say, well, we now can sell the stadium to ourselves. I've spoken to 1 or 2 people in the industry, I've spoken to 1 or 2 journalists, and the consensus of opinion was that it was just a mistake. They didn't mean to do it. It was cock up rather than conspiracy. So there was nothing Machiavellian behind this decision. But what it did allow was Derby County to sell Pride Park to another company set up by Mel Morris and take that profit and knock it off against your FFP losses. And that's fine if it's done at a commercial rate.
Kieran, who decides that? Because my understanding is the Man City sponsorship issue was not the Arab Airlines sponsoring them, but that the hugely inflated rate over market value. Is there some kind of watching of, I don't know how much a football stadium is worth, but who decides that?
Well, in theory, that will be decided by a quantity surveyor. So as far as I'm aware, Derby County Football Club employed a quantity surveyor who says, yeah, it's worth £80 million. Okay. Now, a cynic would say, well, hold on. You've got a willing company selling the stadium, Derby County. You've got a willing buyer, Mel Morris, and you've got an independent third party, the surveyor. But who's paying the surveyor? Yeah. And they've been signed off by the auditors. Okay, who's paying the auditors? I'm not saying that these people have done anything wrong, but it does mean that there are conflicts of interest arising. Whereas if I was selling you my house, I'd be trying to get as high a price as possible. You'd be trying to get as low a price as possible, and that's the deal. We meet somewhere in the middle. when you're selling something to myself, let's say that I'm skint today. Here's my iPhone. I'm going to sell it to me for 10 grand. Well, hey, don't have to go and work for the next month. Jobs are good. And that's the position we've got with the Derby County Stadium. Is 81 million pounds. Derby County have booked 81 million pounds of cash from asset sales in their accounts. Is that a fair price? I don't know. And it's not really for me to say. All I would say, and again, I'm not an expert on property, is that Derby have sold their ground for 80 to 81 million pounds. In 2016, West Ham sold a piece of prime London property in the shape of Upton Park for 40 million pounds. Is property in Derby worth twice that of London? I'm not quite saying. It's not really my job to say. I would be surprised, but clearly, perhaps I'm a bit daft, perhaps I've misread this, and also having seen what's happened to Upton Park, it's now been converted into apartments and residential property. And if you've seen the price of those apartments, those are eye-wateringly expensive. So if Upton Park is worth 40, why is Derby worth 80? That seems a bit strange. If you then look at Reading, Reading's Thames Valley, again, it's quite a pricey area. 2 years ago, Reading Stadium was sold to the owners 26 million. So we got Majewski 26, Upton Park 40, Pride Park 81. Okay, nothing to see there. No.
Interesting. And 81 conveniently is around the ballpark of 2 years of parachute payments, isn't it, as well, if you're looking for a number that you're trying to compete with. How then can England's all-time top scorer be joining Derby in January? And we need to go back to our gambling friends at 32 Red. I can't remember who that Real Madrid president was, who said sometimes the most expensive signings are actually the cheapest ones. Are Derby actually going to pay any of Rooney's wages here? Or is the betting company doing it?
No, directly. Yes, they will be paying those wages. Again, I think here it's a really smart piece of negotiation by Derby. They will have got an enhanced sponsorship deal from 32 Red because Rooney's wearing the 32 shirt. So clearly there is a link there. Can he still do it? Wayne Rooney's still a fantastic football player. I think he's been allowed to sort of slip off the radar. He had a fair season at Everton, and yet they let him go after 1 year. A lot of people have written him off too early. He will be on a sizable deal. Will he also have an image rights deal? Will he be an ambassador for 32 Red? Potentially, and if he does so, then he's perfectly entitled to pick up remuneration through those particular methods. But his direct wages will be paid by the club. I anticipate that Derby will have renegotiated the sponsorship deal with 32 Red, and that's just good business.
I suspect a close second in your owner favourites is Mr. Chansiri at Sheffield Wednesday, Kieran, isn't it? Another stadium manoeuvrer, and you were getting very cross with his accounts going in very late this year, weren't you? You were a bit worried last time we spoke. Has he bought himself some time? And we should mention Gary Monk just in now, who's a very safe pair of hands. Dealing with, he obviously picked up the hot potato at Birmingham, didn't he, after their previous ownership issues. How's Mr. Chansiri doing?
Financially, Sheffield Wednesday's intriguing. He set up, I think it was 4 companies called Sheffield 1 Limited, Sheffield 2 Limited, Sheffield 3 Limited, Sheffield 4 Limited. I think Sheffield 2 Limited are now the official owners of Hillsborough. So that the club doesn't own it. That was sold for 60 million. Is that a fair price? Could be, could not be. But what we do need, and this is where I think the EFL really need to show that they mean business. And I do think the appointment of Rick Parry is an excellent addition.
There's a question on that at the end, Kieran, so keep your powder dry on that one.
Okay, rightio. Then what the EFL will do is that they will appoint independent people, and they will say, this is what we think the stadium is going to be, and it's going to be our final decision, which goes into the equations for FFP purposes. The clubs are, of course, entitled to appeal. That could go to a lawsuit, and it could drag out for 4 years, as we've seen in relation to QPR, where the EFL's legal bill was £3 million, and I assume that QPR's was something similar. So, yeah, Sheffield Wednesday is a funny one because it's not just the owner selling the ground to himself. If you take a look at the perimeter advertising, there's adverts for a taxi company in Sheffield owned by the owner, which doesn't appear to own any taxis. I occasionally use Uber, and I have a moan if they don't turn up with 10 minutes. But at least I know, hey, Uber do have some drivers. They do have some taxis. So, there's that. There's a sports drink company, which is also owned by the owner. The kit is being manufactured by a sportswear company. It's owned by the owner. What a coincidence. Does it mean that these companies are paying generous prices for the deals? Could be. But it does seem strange that these transactions are taking place. I did get a bit arsey with Sheffield Wednesday for choosing to break the law and not publish their accounts on time.
How late were they?
It's about 2 months, but they'd used a loophole to push them back 2 months, and it was another 2 months beyond that. And then when they've sold the ground, yes, it's in the accounts as being sold, but they've not actually received any cash for it. So that seems a bit nuts. If I sold you my house, Ben, the one thing I'd want to get from you is the cash from the sale of the house. So they appear to have sold the stadium to whoever this company is, Sheffield 2 Limited, and I think they're being paid over 6 or 7 years for it. That's an unusual way to finance a property deal.
Interesting.
So a cynic would say it's being undertaken purely to circumvent FFP rules, and it has. It has not broken the rules. It's shimmied its way through them. If my centre forward does the same tomorrow at Newcastle, dodges, weaves, and puts it in the back of the net through going left, right, centre, getting around the opposition, then that's fine. And that's what appears to be the case here. They have not broken the rules. They've identified a weakness, exploited the weakness, and benefited in terms of FFP compliance as a result.
A lot of shimmying going on, Kieran, a lot. Just a quick mention, it looks like the flag bearer for the lawsuit against Derby is going to be Steve Gibson at Middlesbrough. It looks like they're going gung-ho for this, and particularly given they were quite close and they've just run out of parachute payments, they're probably the one with the most to lose with that, but we'll go on to them. Last time you gave out a couple of gold stars to Leeds and Bristol City. Leeds, if you watch the Amazon documentary, Mr. Radrazani's constantly talking about FFP. But the question I want to ask you, Kieran, is: are managers undervalued by owners? Are you much better off paying Marcelo Bielsa £3 million a year than signing an unproven striker, from the Premier League? And on the Bristol City side, selling brilliantly, selling very high. Webster, case in point to your lot. I was going to say they look very nicely set for the playoffs, and Benica Fobi's done his knee yesterday and isn't around for the rest of the season now. But are these two still near the top of your class? And talk to me about the model being, no, we're going to pay this revered manager a ton of money. Okay, maybe Leeds might be the only club who could have actually managed to get that type of manager. But anyway, Leeds and Bristol City.
I think Leeds certainly have tried to live within their means. Under Cellino, that they were very much that way orientated, because he didn't want to put a bean into the club. He was, whatever Cellino's motives were, and he's as what you're wanting from a Latino manager or a Latino owner. He's very passionate. He enjoys a lawsuit. He enjoys a fight. but he didn't want to put much of his own money into the club. What we're seeing with the present owner is that Leeds have been quite cute. They've sold 10% of the club in effect to the San Francisco 49ers. So that's the way that the money's been brought in over the year. I don't think that he's wanted to put any more money in. So therefore, whilst Leeds did go for it to a certain extent last season, you think about the Patrick Bamford signing, this year they've been fairly cautious in the transfer market.
Loans again.
They sold
Ben White and Helder Costa.
They sold the player to Spurs, loaned him straight back. They've got Ben White from the Albion. He's brilliant.
He's very good, actually. Yeah,
he's fantastic centre half. So I think that they've got the lad from Arsenal as well. I think they've just bought really well. They've got the impetus from having the manager as well. I think they're in a very, very strong position. Certainly from a footballing side, they look very good. I think from a financial side, by bringing the players in on loan, they've reduced their risks for this season, and they've made themselves very attractive to investors as well.
And commercially, they're always well up there, aren't they?
Oh yeah, I mean Leeds commercial income. The average in the Championship is 7 million. Leeds 22.
Brilliant.
So they are far and away ahead of the rest of that division. It's a one city club. It's a club which is going to sell out if they're doing well. You're going to get 35,000 there every week. Yeah, anybody knows that Leeds travel in numbers as well. So I think that they've got a lot of appeal to commercial sponsors, and also they know realistically they're going to be on TV 18 to 20 times minimum this season. That again makes them really popular if you're trying to sell advertising space, sponsorship deals, commercial deals, and so on. So I think Leeds are in a really strong position. When it comes to Bristol City have spent a bit more money. But they've invested in the infrastructure. Ashton Gate is now looking better, and that means that you can get more money coming in from conferences, from meals for large organisations and things of this nature. They're trying to sweat the assets a bit more, which again is a smart thing to do. Steve Hargraves, ridiculously rich individual, very, very smart guy as well. He's let the purse strings go to an extent, but as you said, they sold Adam Webster for 20 odd million. He's now played twice in the Premier League. The first time away to Manchester City when you're trying to mark David Silva. That's going to be a bit of a baptism of fire. But even so, it was he improved as that match went on, and in fact, it was him taking the ball 50 yards up the pitch, which was ended by Laporte's crunching into him, and I think that could cost City the Premier League title this season. So when we saw him play last weekend, he's looking a Premier League player already. So you've got to give them credit for buying a player. Was he came to you or came from you guys?
Pompey to 3.5 million. Ipswich to Bristol City. Yeah, he's worked his way up well. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's had as well, Kieran. I think Mick taught him how to defend, and then Lee Johnson kind of opened him up. So he's had two different managers as well to work under with different styles. So yeah, I think Webster's going to be very good.
Cool. Yeah, I think Bristol is a strong position.
Yeah, very good, very good. Preston and Brentford, who I like both, traditionally kind of small. I always link them together because they kind of seem to do the same thing a slightly different way. You've got Brentford going to the European market, sign, sell, and the value seems to go up every time. Preston seem to do it from the lower leagues. It looks like I know Brentford finally get to their new stadium at the end of the season, don't they? It looks like the flaw in this model, like you see at Brentford, is too many out and too many in. But the sense I get with Preston and Brentford, Kieran, is that by the time they're negotiating to sell, the replacement's already at the club and he's been there for 3 months or what have you. So I really like these two. What do you think?
Yeah, Brentford are fascinating. The fact that they've done away with their academy and they've replaced it with trying to recruit effectively players not wanted by other clubs in London. And I think this is where they're in the perfect position to take advantage of London being a big city. It's got half a dozen clubs in the Premier League already. You've got academies where you're going to have players coming out who are disillusioned. It then comes down to the quality of their talent identification. Matthew Benham, who's in charge, as you know, he runs one of the big betting companies himself. They do a lot of research into players. So there can be a bit of research done from the betting arm. Say, well, these players, if you look at their metrics, and he's very much into big data. And I think we are moving into an era of football. It's not going to be quite Moneyball, but where clubs will be identifying strengths of players from the data analytics team as much as from the scouts. And I think Brentford have very much bought into that belief when they moved to the new version of Griffin Park, and that is coming on quite well because that's quite close to the Sky Studios in London.
You can see it from the flyover, can't you? As you drive in there, yeah.
And it's a shame because Brentford is one of my favourite grounds. I absolutely love, and which is unusual because they inevitably used to absolutely thrash us 3 or 4-0 when we used to go there with Brighton. But hey, with having 4 pubs at the corner of each pylon, we didn't particularly care by half time. We were gone. So I think they're strong. But even so, I say people would think Brentford, a well-run club, they were losing 350 grand a week in terms of running themselves as a football club, and they've always relied on player sales to dig themselves out of that, and they've been successful. But you only need 2 seasons when you can't unearth any diamonds, and all of a sudden you're in a problem. When it comes to Preston, Trevor Hemmings, the guy that owns Preston North End, he seems to get quite a lot of criticism from a section of the fan base, and they're perfectly entitled to say what they want. He's putting £100,000 a week into the club. He's lending that club £5 to £6 million pounds each season, and the attitude of some of the fans appears to be, well, you're not subsidising the club enough. And I think that if I was putting £100,000 into anything in my life, and let's face it, I don't earn that in a few years. Then I'd wonder why on earth am I doing it if I'm getting a load of stick? And I think there's a parallel there to a certain extent with Marcus Evans at Ipswich. And I read the forums before I normally do an analysis, and just to try to sort of pick up a feel for what's happening in a club. And he's another one of those owners who every year he's putting in a large sum of money into the club, and then the fans turn around enough and say, well, you're giving us £6 million, you're giving us £10 million enough this year. That's not enough. That's a lot of money. And I do think that we as fans have lost touch with value and actually the extent to which owners are subsidising the clubs. And that's what they're doing. They're subsidising our entertainment. If Preston North End lived within their means, they'd be in League One. So you might not like what the fans perceive as a lack of ambition, and you will see the constant speculate to accumulate, and that doesn't work. If I say to my wife this at the end of this month, look, I'm going to take my pay packet. I'm not going to pay the mortgage. I'm not going to pay the council tax bill. I'm not going to pay the lecky bill. Tell you what, I'm going to spend it all on scratch cards because we might win 50 grand. Well, she's going to bat me round the head, and rightly so. So why do football fans, who they wouldn't do that with their own finances, why do they assume? Why do they turn around to the likes of Trevor Hemming and say, well, if you stuck £20 million into the club this season, that might work. And I've got 2 words to say to that: Tony G. Think about what happened at Aston Villa. He put a lot of money into that club in over 2 seasons, and Aston Villa were within 1 hour of going out of business.
Wow. And Yeah, as much as we're very sad about Bury, this is Aston Villa as well, the
Yeah.
European Cup winners. Yes, let's talk about some more interesting owners who I know you love, Kieran. We have, look at this for a Fab Four: the Alams at Hull, Mr. Marianakis at Forest, Trillion Trophy Asia at Birmingham, and Roland de Châtelet. That is a rogues gallery, that isn't it? Allegedly, it's all on Kieran. At Forest, Mr. Marianakis looks to have made a good hire in Lamouchi. Big club, big audiences, new stand coming. What do you think about Forest's upside? And can you talk about Mr. Marianakis selling players from Olympiacos to Forest and from Forest to Olympiacos and the potential ethics of that?
Well, the ethics work if you get promoted. If you think about what happened at Watford with their owners owning Italian club, and all of a sudden they were supplying Watford with clubs. Watford get promoted. Watford have now been in Watford have established themselves in the Premier League now for, was it 4 or 5 seasons? So ethics and football don't go together. And let's not be hypocrites, because if it was our owner doing it with our club, we just, yeah, let's go for it. If it's my player diving in the box and we get a penalty and we get 3 points, or we sneak a draw, hey, I'm not going to complain. So I'm pretty relaxed on the ethical side of things. It's up to UEFA to implement, and the Premier League, and the Greek National League to monitor those transactions. You're not going to get huge prices for going either way, I think, in respect of those two clubs. So it's sort of transferring from your left hand to your right hand, your assets. Which, hey, we're back in Mel Morris territory here, and it's just one of those things. Multi-club ownership is a feature of modern football. You've only got to look at the City group, in terms of Manchester City, with New York City, with Melbourne City, with owning, is it 27% of Genoa, and Pep Guardiola's brother owns a large chunk of the club as well, and then they got an investment in Uruguay. It's going to happen. If I think about my club, Brighton, our owner owns a club in Belgium, and our striker goes there on loan, and that's the way it works. So multi-club ownership is fine unless you're dealing with two clubs in the same domestic arrangement.
I just
So it's
I just went off on a little thought process. What's going on in the Greek FA building right now? That was probably just a fun place to work, isn't it? I suspect you can probably smoke a cigar at your desk at the Greek FA, can't you?
yeah, and the best, and the greatest thing about Greek football is next week's results a week early. So
Unbelievable scenes, allegedly at Birmingham. They were our FFP points deduction case study guinea pigs last season. And Kieran, we did a piece and we got some lovely comments from some Birmingham fans, didn't we? All completely rooted in fact, I have to say. So Trillion are blaming previous bad decisions with Uncle Harry and Uncle Gianfranco. They fell out with Gary Monk as well, so he's gone. The It looks a bit more stable. I don't know what your view is. They sold Che Adams and Hotter, and they've not spent all of that money. Are they off the naughty step now, Kieran?
yes, yeah, I think very much so. They know that they're being monitored very carefully. There are some unusual issues, as always. So that their training ground is now the Trillion Trophy training ground, which is difficult to say. So they're being sponsored by the owners. We're not quite sure what's happening with St Andrews. It may have been sold.
Sorry, do you mean the Trillion Trophy Stadium?
Well, sorry, the Trillion Trophy Stadium could have now been sold to Trillion Trophy. There's something happening in terms of the ownership of the stadium, but we've not yet managed to get a final decision on that. So it does allow the owners to inject money into the club. That is perfectly legitimate. why would a Hong Kong company choose to sponsor a training ground in Birmingham? Yeah, I can't see the I can't see the commercial benefits. For a property development company in Southeast Asia to benefit commercially from such a deal. But then you could say exactly the same in respect of Everton, whose training ground is owned by a Ukrainian mining company whose owner happened to have bought his shares from the present owner of Everton. You follow the money, you follow the trails and the connections, and it all just seems, well, yeah, perhaps these people it's just a favour, just being nice guys to each other, for all I know. So yeah, I think Birmingham have done okay. I mean, certainly the player sales will mean that they'll be fine in terms of FFP. Effectively, what happens is that once you have been fined for FFP purposes, the clock is set back to zero.
Oh,
so
I
the
didn't
way
know
that it will work with the Birmingham is that they are not on a £39 million 3-year tariff. They are on £13 million last season.
Okay.
And it'll be 26, and then we'll get 39 at the end of the 3 years. So it's not as if you're already in a mess and we're still going to monitor you based on that mess. Effectively, you paid your tariff of 9 points, and we've reset the clock to zero, which will allow the club to budget going forwards, and they'll have nobody else to blame apart from the people that appoint the manager.
I just got to tell you a funny story, Kieran. I used to work with a guy called Gary, so you know this is going to be good. I said, "How was your weekend, Gary?" And he said, "Oh, sorted out all my debts. I got him into a debt reconsolidation package, so I pay one monthly fee." And I'm like, "Oh, that sounds great." And then he said, "Yeah, I'm renting a home cinema system now."
No.
So let's hope Birmingham now don't go and do the equivalent of Gary renting a home cinema system. But Sunjic for 7 million, when you've raised 16 million from Hotter and Adams is fine, isn't it? At Charlton and Hull, we have two very despised owners. Mr. De Chatelet, who sounds like an Agatha Christie villain, doesn't he? He nearly fell out with Lee Bowyer in close season. He stayed, and Charlton actually looked very competitive, but De Chatelet very clear that he wants it sold and he wants it done. Hull, I think, are my new iceberg team now, Kieran. No more parachute payments. They've got a load of players in the last year of contracts, and their team is completely predicated on Jared Bowen being absolutely brilliant and Kamil Grzycki being absolutely brilliant. And Bowen has got one of these deals where they can trigger another year. So I assume, very similar to Aaron Moy, they'll trigger the other year and then sell
Yeah.
him straight away. But this looks like it's trending downwards. Charlton and Hull, what do you think?
Well, in terms of Hull, I mean, Hull have earned a gold star from me because they actually published their 29 results last Saturday.
Oh, they've done it already.
And those are out already.
Oh.
You check the price of football. We've got a full report
I
on them.
will be doing so.
Travelling down from Manchester to Brighton and back, I had nothing better to do on the train than write 1,500 words of nonsense.
Why was it that early?
They're very well. They do tend to produce them early, which is great from my point of view. The other viewpoint, and this is a cynical one taken by some Hull fans, is that because the results were actually quite good last season, because they were earning their parachute payments, last parachute payments, if they put those out in the public domain, Mr. Alam is trying to sell the club. So anybody seeing those results will say, that looks quite reasonable, actually. This club seems to be very, very well run, ignoring the fact that 80% of their income is coming from parachute payments, and they're going to disappear this season and be replaced by the EFL deal. So they're going to drop down from around about £40 million to £7 million, and that's going to be tough to deal with. But as you said, they've got a lot of players in their final year of contract, and those players will not be kept on, or they will be offered significantly reduced terms if they do sign a new contract. So, well, if I carry on with Hull,
yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Alam has also repaid himself £13 million worth of his loans to the club. So his loans are now down to 50 million, and the stories that I'm picking up, I get contacted by brokers and agents and people who know the inside of the football. I'm just some bloke with a calculator and more time on my hands than sense. They think that the asking price for Hull is 50 million. So he's owed 50 million. If he can get his 50 million back, I think he'll walk away. What will happen then will be intriguing because guess who owns Hull City Football Stadium? It's owned by a company called Super Stadium Limited. And who owns Super Stadium Limited? Hey, it's Mr. Alarm.
Oh, God.
So we've got a complication there. And the rent that Hull are paying.
Oh, that's another Coventry, Kieran.
Well,
Oh, God.
it starts to get complicated because the rent has got a 10% escalator each year, and you compound 10% over a few years, and I think they'll be paying for this season be over £900,000. It was £450 5 years ago. So there are issues involved, complications. I think whoever buys Hull City needs to get a deal with the stadium at the same time.
And a
So
deal
that's
and a deal involving Jared Bowen staying as well. What about
well.
Charlton?
There are some similarities in respect of Charlton. Lee Boyer has done a magnificent job. When people say that Charlton have recruited well this season, they've not spent a dime. The loan signings, the players that they've brought up from League One have all performed very well. I think they've signed. Okay, hey, they've signed 2 players from Brighton, just like everybody seems. Brighton are. So they've got Tomer Hemed, who is an excellent Championship striker, although he's not done much in the season. Beram Kayal is a fantastic midfield player. We were very fortunate to get him playing for us, and he was instrumental in getting us promoted. So I think they have bought extremely well. Again, if you start to look at the numbers, I can't go into too much detail. I was asked to value Charlton on behalf of somebody who was interested in buying the club, and I came up with a valuation, and they said, "Well, on what basis of this?" So I went through all the technical stuff with them, and they said, "Well, is that a fair price?" I think it's a fair price. The problem is Roland wants 60 million because he's put 60 million into the club, and my valuation was substantially less than that. So I think the problem that's going to be very difficult to circumnavigate is the fact that you've got a stubborn owner who feels that he has done good for the club and he has put money in. I think the money's been spent poorly. The recruitment of managers has been poor, which has led to the club being relegated. So I think decisions have been poor. Has he put the money in? Yes. Does he know how to communicate with fans? Clearly not. He's sort of he's a mini Mike Ashley in many regards, but he wants his £60 million back. It's not worth it. If I can buy Wigan for 20 million, why pay 60 million for Charlton when they're both in the same division?
And I was always interested as well. The contracts that the Chatterley had put out is that Luton went up and sold their 2 fullbacks for like 10 million between them. Charlton went up, and Aribo, their most creative player, went for free to Rangers, and Bauer, the captain, went for free to Preston. So they haven't ring-fenced their best assets on the pitch either in terms of resale. 3 teams that have recently been in the Premier League that are going to need a period of getting lots of things right are QPR, Borough, and Reading. We've already mentioned that Borough at the head of the queue to sue Derby. They're out of parachute payments now. It looks like QPR and Borough have got both got forward-thinking managers, and they're going to try and put the young players in and philosophy themselves up the table. Reading, I'm fascinated by because, tell me if you think I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but I think Reading have completely changed their plan on its head because they gave themselves a transfer embargo, and then on deadline day they spent 12 million on 2 strikers, and it made me think: have Reading decided that when they see Bristol City and Brentford selling players for signing and selling, that the only way they can possibly compete, rather than dying a slow death like Ipswich did and not spending the money, have they decided that the only way we can compete is to gamble in that way. I know which strategy I think you're going to prefer, but what do you think in terms of the Mark Warburton or Jonathan Woodgate gate at QPR and Borough, and Reading just turning complete tail on their austerity?
Well, I think the issue with Reading was that they were under a soft embargo from the EFL. As recently as April, they failed to pay their wages on time. Now, the club have said, that was due to the fact that the wage payment coincided with a bank holiday in China. Um, that may be the case, but it does seem strange because I know when bank holidays are. I know when Christmas Day is, and therefore I need to buy the Christmas presents in advance. So therefore, if you're going
Says
to
on the
pay wages on a
calendar.
bank holiday, yeah, oh, bank holiday. Oh, but don't pay them the previous Friday. That gets rid of the problem. Yeah, does that make me a financial genius? Should I be applying for the FD's job at Reading? I don't know. So it appeared that they were having some financial glitches. They had spent money, I think, the previous season. They signed the likes of Sam Baldock and so on. Hey, for Brighton, what a surprise! And they'd spent a lot of money, and that hadn't worked. They were towards the wrong end of the division from their point of view. Then they had this soft embargo applied to them by the EFL, which meant that they couldn't trade. It could be that during this period of time, again, they've got Chinese owners, and the Chinese owners have done their sums and said, well, let's go for it as far as 2019-20 is concerned, and they just released the break. So I think they had actually in a very, very narrow window when they could sign players because they were waiting for the soft embargo to cease. And once that was released, that allowed the club to go in and compete in the market. And they have spent significant sums, but they've also let quite a few players go from what I see on the forums. And I think ideally they'd like to have got rid of a few more as well. But they've got legacy problems in that they've got players who were signed 12 months previous to that who are on very good contracts by championship standards, and they didn't perform in 2018-19, and therefore they're struggling to find homes for these players.
And what about Borough and QPR?
QPR's owners have, to a large extent, lost interest. They want the club to make ends meet, and that appears to be the approach that they're taking this season. They are constrained by having a relatively small stadium as well, and they're competing against Chelsea and clubs in the local vicinity. I think their philosophy is a good one. Bring through the youth players again. They've got the advantage of being in a city of 7 or 8 million people. Finding 2 or 3 footballers amongst them coming through each season who have been jettisoned by the bigger clubs, so therefore they've already had the benefit of long periods of time being brought through the youth ranks academy and getting used to various issues. But if their original clubs don't want them because they don't think they can make it in the Premier League, they've still got the opportunity to recruit from those clubs, and also they're ideal from a loanee point of view because the player doesn't have to move digs, they can stay with their family. The host club's going to like that and things of that nature. So I think they're pretty well run. Borough is an interesting one. Borough do seem very, very angry. Steve Gibson is clearly unhappy with what has taken place at other clubs. And I guess last season, with Borough finishing 7th, if you look at the side that finished 6th, it was Derby County. What did Derby County do? Hey, they sold their ground to themselves. Who did Derby then play in the playoff final? It was Aston Villa. What did Aston Villa do? Hey, they sold their ground to themselves. But more importantly, they didn't have to sell Jack Grealish. Jack Grealish, for me, best player in the Championship. I appreciate what didn't play for the whole season last season, but every time I watch him play, he's one of those people that just glides over the turf. An absolute joy to watch, especially at that level. So Borough are falling off a cliff this season because they were relegated in the first season after being promoted. They only get 2 years of parachute payments, so it's 41, 34, zip. And therefore they're having to cut back. I've seen that they have sold players, and what's normally happening these days is that when you do sell players, especially if they're multi-million pound deals, those deals are sold on the basis of the buying club playing in instalments. What Borough are doing, Borough are going to banks and saying, look, we're owned. We got €4 million coming in from Atalanta for a couple of payments on Martin de Roon or other players that we've sold. Will you give us the value of that contract? And that's what Borough are doing. So it's indicative of a club which needs cash because it will have legacy players on decent contracts. How they're going to get rid of them? I think they're in a bit of a financial pickle. Steve Gibson's great. Steve Gibson is Mr. Borough. He'll make sure that the bills will be paid, but it's going to be a bigger issue for them this season in terms of FFP compliance.
We've only got 5 left, Kieran. You'll be pleased to hear. All of these teams actually recently in League One. Wigan, Millwall, and Blackburn managed to kind of hang in there a little bit. Millwall had a sort of transitional year, and they've strengthened to the point that a Millwall can. I think they've broken the transfer record a couple of times. Blackburn seem to have accumulated a decent first team and put some money into Sam Gallagher. Wigan have taken Kiefer Moore. It looks like with all three, though, that they would need a very fit team all year and for lots of stuff to go right to be in that, 7th place to 12th place. And they'll all I think Millwall and Blackburn will likely be in the middle somewhere, and Wigan might have I suppose you know about Wigan in your part of the world. Have any of those three any chance of competing, especially in this year with only 6 parachute teams?
I think they do. And again, it comes down to the quality of their loan signings and having 1 or 2 academy players burst through into the first team, and that can make a difference. You just need one good striker. If I think about, you go back to Huddersfield, you go back to Sheffield United last season. That they signed Oliver Norwood on loan from it was Brighton, and those players can make a difference. So I think it is a more open. It's more open division this year than any time. I think Leeds should get promoted. I think they're the best footballing side. I think they've got the best coach. But other than that, Derby, as we've seen, I think they've struggled. They've lost Lampard. I don't know how good a coach he was, but certainly he recruited well in terms of their loan signings. They've not had the same benefits this season. Villa have gone up. There's no real favourites to go up with anybody, with the exception of Leeds. I expect West Brom to have a good season. There's no reason why a club such as Wigan or Millwall, those clubs, why they can't put together a run of 6 or 7 victories on the trot, and then it's not just 7th to 10th that they're looking at; they're looking for 6th or 5th. So I think it's an open division this year, and as you say, the benefits of clubs that have come down, they are cutting back on expenditure. Fulham, I think Fulham will probably come. Thinking about it, Fulham should go up, or Fulham will certainly be top 6. Other than that, who knows?
2 left. We already covered Charlton. The other 2 promoted teams were Barnsley and Luton. Barnsley went all European, bought in 12 players, but did sell their top scorer to Wigan as well. Luton, as we said, cashed in on their 2 excellent fullbacks. They went for a fee on a goalkeeper. There's always this thought that goalkeepers are undervalued. Frees and loans otherwise, and you've already mentioned Izzy Brown earlier in the show. He's now at Luton. New stadium. It's 2023. It feels like Luton have just got to try and survive until 2023 when they'll be next to the M1. When I see these clubs come up and they sell their assets, I'm talking about Jack Stacey and James Justin, who went to Bournemouth and Leicester. I don't think as a Luton fan you should have an issue with that. I think you should think, no, we need to generate that money. We need to fuel up the club. For that reason, I see Luton having a bit of a bigger upside than Barnsley. Are they going to survive?
I think they've got a fair chance. I think the people in charge of Luton are very interesting. They are quite visionary in their approach. I think that they're not just involved in stadium development. They've got some other property issues as well. And they certainly want to go forward on that basis. And more importantly, they're fans. So I'd hope from that club's point of view, and let's face it, Luton historically have suffered from points deductions and dropping down into the conference and things of that nature. So I think if they get things right, then it will be a case of top half of the bottom six will be their ambition, and anything better than that. And again, I think that would be the same for Barnsley. Barnsley have got new owners. There's all this talk of Billy Bean and Moneyball and so on, but actually it's Chinese owners that have come in really as far as Barnsley are concerned. My one concern with all Chinese owners is who's advising them. Sometimes you will have very good professional advisors. On other occasions, it will be people who have putting their own interests ahead of the owners and the club. And they're trying to sign deals and arrangements and fees and things of nature which are for the best interests of the agent rather than the best interests of the club in hand. Because if you're a Chinese property developer or a Chinese toy manufacturer or whatever, you've not got the experience of running a football league club and the challenges that brings. So therefore you tend to delegate that to somebody else. A lot will then depend upon who you've chosen to delegate that responsibility to.
Kieran,
so I'd fear a little bit for Barnsley.
We've done it again. 24 clubs. There you go. And I think it needs to be said with most podcasters, they look at one club. I try and look at 24 and find that hard enough. Kieran has to look at about 100. So it's very impressive, Kieran. And I get very annoyed when people have little prods at you because I'm like, this guy has to do literally 100 clubs and know kind of the background about all of them. Do you have time to just do some quick fire ones from Twitter and
Yeah,
YouTube,
sure,
Kieran?
absolutely. Yeah, fire away. Yeah.
Mark Goddard asks, interested in the series of amazing coincidences that surround the first letters in each of his financial reports. Well, this strange weirdness, you have the worst luck, don't you?
I do. I did a report on Burnley, and if you did choose the first letter of each sentence of the financial analysis, it said Sean Dyche has a pet hamster called Big Dave.
I don't know. And this keeps happening as well. It keeps happening as well, doesn't it? I just don't get how your luck is that bad.
Yeah, well, if only I could turn that luck to my lottery tickets choices each week, because I've not had a dime off that for about 3 years now.
Daniel Shelker asks, what do the clubs who use the loophole of selling their stadia to holding companies do in 2 to 3 years' time if they're still in the Championship with wages way above income?
Then they got 2 or 3 choices. A, they cut back. And remember, Derby County's benefit didn't just affect them in 2018 because of the nature of FFP. They had a benefit in 2019 as well, and they'll also have a benefit in the present season in terms of that additional £40 million. So what it could be, they get to the end of this season and they decide we're going to have significant cutbacks in terms of recruitment, wage levels, and things of this nature. So that'll be item number 1. Item number 2, they could buy the stadium back for £1 because perhaps property prices in Derby have fallen. They mysteriously went up to twice that of London, and now people have said over the course of the last 12 months, for whatever reason, blame it on Brexit, blame it on whatever you choose, property prices have gone. So they could buy it back for going for a song, and therefore not have to pay any rent on that, or they can save money. Thirdly, they could find some other assets to sell at fascinating prices.
Interesting.
They've got training grounds. Mel Morris might have a pencil sharpener that's he doesn't need, and somebody comes in and pays him 30 million quid for it. A guy called Mel Morris, perhaps. Who knows?
Pencil sharpener that Elvis once touched, apparently. So it is worth.
That's right.
There you go. Guy Bailey asks, what's our views on Richard Parry being appointed? No grown man should be called Rick at 60. Then I thought Rick Wakeman is kind of like a wizard, isn't he? He deserves to be called Rick at 60. Steve Gibson will have some choice thoughts given his integral role in the 3 points debacle and the later Christian Ziege poaching as Liverpool chief exec. So Rick Parry, who was the kind of mastermind behind getting that big Sky deal, wasn't he? For the Premier League in '92. No, well, it wasn't a big Sky deal then, but started the ball rolling there. He is going to be the chairman, am I right, of the EFL?
That's right. Yep. I think it's a really good piece of recruitment. Rick Parry is used to being in a room with 20 people, 20 plus people with huge egos and trying to get them all pointing in the same direction. He had to deal with that in the Premier League, and he was successful. I think some of his decisions when he was chief of the Premier League have come back and have benefited those clubs hugely. I think the classic one was going overseas and practically giving away the Premier League TV rights, and building up an interest in the Premier League, which has now made it the biggest global provider of weekly sports entertainment in the world, as far as viewing figures are concerned. He's a smart guy. I've met him on a couple of occasions. He strikes me as pretty up and down. I think he's very keen on governance and integrity. He sits on the UEFA FFP panel, so he's quite happy to wave the big stick, provided club owners accept that his aims will be in the best long-term interests of the league. Because Rick's 64. I don't think he needs to work, so I think he's doing it because he's actually a huge football fan. So I'm hopeful that if he's allowed to do his job, he will be a big success, and bring the football league away from some of the controversies that it's had in recent years. And whilst I give Sean Harvey quite a bit of stick, I do acknowledge that he had a tough job to do. Rick has I think he has the experience and he has the knowledge of working within football for a number of years. So I think it's a good piece of recruitment by the EFL.
Great. Andy Grimes asks, are there any agreed and published fines or points or deductions for FFP breaches? It seemed as if the 9 points Birmingham got were nothing more than an arbitrary deduction to send a warning to other clubs. I think they tried to justify, they divided that up, didn't they? 9 points were for the breach, and then what was it, like an extra, or 8 points and then an extra point for the aggravated breach or the flagrant breach or something?
Well, I think if you take a look at the ruling, and it is on the EFL website, and for the first time we actually see the tariff. So there is, if you exceed your FFP losses of £39 million, it then goes up to, if I think it's a 15-point deduction if you're say £15 million above that limit, and then it's tiered. But on top of that, and I think this is where the arbitrariness comes in, there are two other issues. One which is called mitigating factors, where the panel will reduce your points penalty. So Birmingham City, they reported themselves to the EFL in terms of the FFP breach, and I think that reduced their points deduction by 1 or 2 points. And then there are aggravating factors. It's where a club's been a bit of an arse and has made life difficult for the panel. And I think Birmingham City actually ended up being fined a couple of points on the aggravating factors because it took a long time for the final decision to be made. Birmingham City reported themselves, I think it was in July or August of 2018, the FFP panel were willing, is my understanding, to come to a decision by September, and that way we would have had clarity throughout the rest of the season. But then there were appeals from Birmingham, there were delaying factors, and that upset the EFL panel. So I think that Birmingham ended up being punished a couple of extra points. So yes, there is a set tariff. Go to the EFL website, look at the Birmingham ruling, and that will give you that indicative thing as to the objective, as to the actual number of points per dollar or per pound that you're losing. But on top of that, that can be increased or decreased on a sliding scale by the panel themselves based on the behaviour of the club during the period of time in which they are before the beak.
Am I dreaming in thinking that there would be enough time between year-end accounts coming in at the start of an April and the football season starting in August that you'd think these points deductions should be meted out before the season starts and then everyone knows where they stand? But am I dreaming with appeals and lawyers and committees that they just get it done when they get it done?
I think so. I mean, I am critical of the EFL at times, but the EFL is under resourced to monitor and make judgment on the accounts of 72 football clubs because their accounting year end is usually the end of June.
Oh,
So,
okay. Not April. Okay.
I just don't think it's realistic. And ultimately, I'm the same as you, Ben. I'm a football fan. Do I want money being spent on youth development schemes, on community schemes, on the development of women's football, on infrastructure, or do I want it to be spent on an army of accountants employed by the EFL for a month of July? I'd rather go for the former. Hopefully, the fact that what has happened to Birmingham will act as a warning to owners. We're going to catch you. We might take a bit more time, but we're going to catch and punish you. So don't think about it.
Interesting. At Leeds London Leeds fan even, sorry. I'd be interested in yours and Kieran's view on a wage cap in the Championship. Obviously, some clubs would try and get around it, sponsors trying paying part of the wages, but it can't be right that so many clubs are spending over 100% of income on wages. Is that any way policeable or enforceable, a wage cap?
Is it policeable? Yes, I think it is, because the clubs could send their monthly wage details to the EFL. Is it enforceable? It probably is, because we do have a wage cap in League One and League Two. So if we haven't one in League One and League Two, then you can have one in the Championship. There also used to be one, and this is something which a lot of fans don't appear to be familiar with. There was a wage cap in the Premier League, and that was abolished at the start of this season because it was starting to bite. And club owners said, well, actually, we want to go and pay them what we want to pay them. So, yes, it could be policed. Yes, it could be enforced. But the issue that I have with the Championship is the very first words that you mentioned to me today, parachute pay.
Yeah.
If you have a club which has £40 million greater than that of another club, then that's got £40 million bigger, or so greater, to spend on wages if it chooses to do so. The reason why we don't have a wage cap in the Championship, it's to allow the likes of Derby County, Leeds United, Forest, Ipswich Town, so if they wish, pay wages which are competitive to me, so that their players say, well, okay, yeah, I could get a couple of extra grand if I moved, but I'm on pretty decent wedge here. I'm popular with the fans. The family are settled here. So it allows those clubs to narrow the difference. If it's an extra 15 grand a week, then the player, and I never criticise players for going elsewhere for more money. It is a short career. The majority of players are coming from working class backgrounds. There's no reason why people from those backgrounds should not be remunerated very well for providing entertainment for us as fans. So I would never criticise players' wage levels. I just think it would create more of a status quo in terms of those clubs being relegated from the Premier League to the Championship, and it will reinforce and probably extend the benefits of being in receipt of parachute payments.
John, be interested if Kieran has any more info on the further investigation into stadium sales at Wednesday, Derby and Reading. The EFL said they were getting an independent commission to look at it. Not heard anything on it since they released that statement. Do you know anything more? And are they going to put an addendum to their rules here on the stadiums?
I've not heard anything more. I think what they will try to do is that if they are going to make a judgment, they will make sure that they've taken appropriate legal advice and will have used specialists to reduce the capacity of clubs who are being investigated appealing, prevaricating, delaying, whatever you want to call it. Do I think the rules will be changed? Part of the reason for the change in the rules in 2016 was to bring the Championship FFP rules into complete alignment with those of the Premier League. So unless the Premier League want to move as well, then I think it unlikely. Also, if we do keep if we do allow the present arrangement, if Derby County, Aston Villa, Sheffield Wednesday, possibly Birmingham City, if Reading, if those 5 clubs have been allowed to sell their stadia to themselves, why should other clubs be prevented from doing so? Surely it's giving an advantage, and a 3-year advantage, to those clubs which have applied those particular rules.
Fascinating. Kieran, thank you so much. I don't know what the clock says, but I think you've done about an hour and a half with me, and everyone was so appreciative last time. Can you give a bit of a plug to the website and your Twitter, which is very entertaining?
Right. I sort of run thepriceoffootball.com. I've got a book called The Price of Football coming out.
Oh, when's that?
Next month.
Oh,
well, it's with the publisher. I'm actually updating.
Are you doing an audio book as well, Kieran?
Sorry?
Are you going to do an audio book version of it as well?
And the thought of me talking for 3 or 4 hours about accounting in football.
A voiceover guy, you know.
Well, possibly. I'll mention it to the publisher. But I think with what's happened in terms of Bury and Bolton, we both felt that because I'd finished writing it in May, because of what's happened over the summer, I just want to add on a section, and also when things coming to light in respect of Derby, Villa, Reading, and Sheffield Wednesday. So I'm just updating that, adding a 5,000 unnecessary words to the existing 65,000 unnecessary words. So I'm hoping to have it out by November.
Tremendous. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's like doing a PhD. And probably with about the same number of people are going to read it.
And what about the Twitter?
Well, the Twitter account, it's I do call myself Price of Football, but somebody's actually got, rather irritatingly, they've got the @Price of Football account, and they don't tweet. So I'm simply @Kieran Maguire, and I'm fairly prolific on Twitter. As I mentioned to you earlier, I do monitor all 92 Football League clubs. I monitor some clubs in the National League as well, and I monitor the clubs in the SPFL, which is the hardest gig, because if you write anything about Rangers or Celtic, the fans of the other club just become obsessed. And I'm going, well, I've got no interest in the religious side of things. I'm an atheist. I've not got a dog in this particular fight. Try to keep me out of it. But Rangers fans in particular are obsessed with my name, and because apparently that tells them that I'm biased.
Is it Irish? Is it?
As it's an Irish name.
There you
go.
Hold
on. I'm a Brighton fan. We've just sold you Connor Goldson and Jamie Murphy. We quite like Rangers, but that's football for you.
Kieran, thank you so much. Will you come back on maybe after January transfer window or something?
Yeah, cool. It'd be my pleasure, mate. Anytime.
Brilliant. And look out for Kieran on Sky Sports and on BBC. He's really, really moving well, and I'm very pleased. Career on a very upward trajectory here. So, Kieran, thank you so much.
That's okay. Sky Sports 3:30 today. I'll be there.